Welcome back to another episode of Touch Base. I'm Josh Haynes, and today we're going to have a great conversation with Charlie Young, one of our founding partners of both Madera Residential and Quext. And today's guest is going to bring us some great content for us to consider. With all the economic ups and downs in our country and even throughout the world right now, I think many of us are interested in knowing, where is the multifamily housing industry going? Where are things at today? What are our leaders prioritizing? This is what Charlie is going to answer for us. This is what Charlie is going to bring to us. A big picture look at Madera's strategies and efforts. Without further delay, here you go. Madera and Quext team members, I'm excited about today's conversation. I'm Josh Haynes, and this is Touch Base, our podcast for the Madera companies. And the man across from me is Charlie Young. He's one of our founding partners for Madera and Quext. You have a ton of experience in the multifamily housing industry, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, and kind of where you see things going and what you see in both the marketplace, but then also just kind of what's going on in America and how people are moving around and looking for homes today. And that's not something all of us think about all the time, but with you getting a macro picture look at what's going on, that's what we're going to kind of walk through. And so, Charlie, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you came to Madera and kind of a little bit about your background, and then kind of what excites you about your work and what we're doing?
Yeah, you bet. So got into the business full-time in 1996. Okay. Started out with Hurt and Stell. Okay. And a little bit of ownership, working on some properties that we owned in Houston. But we started growing fee management, and that's really where I cut my teeth, was in the operational side of the business. Okay. In West Texas and in Houston, and then we expanded into Dallas. And so for a long period, we ran along buying a property or two and managing a whole bunch of properties for a lot of other people, and that is where I got to cut my teeth. Okay. And got market experience. As time goes on, different partners come and go. Steve decided to retire. At one point, Paul decides to go on and do a different route with residential. And so Madera comes into play roughly 08, 09 in there. We bought our first deal as sponsoring deals in July of 08. And from there, July of 08 was the first deal, and a hurricane literally and figuratively comes through Baytown, Texas in September of 08. And that was the place of our first property, the Lakes of Madera. And so that was an interesting beginning. So a little bit of the experience is spending a whole lot of time in Dallas, Houston, West Texas, but also at this point in time, I've now lived through 3 recessions. Wow! And they all come in a different way. Yeah. You never see them coming, and so we're now at a place where we've got a little bit of a fresh start. And so we're preparing and getting ready for the opportunities that come with that.
Yeah. So give us a kind of a macro level perspective of kind of how you see the multifamily housing industry going right now. Like, what are you seeing, like I said, from a big picture, and we kind of make our way down a little bit further, but big picture speaking, what are you seeing? What are you looking for?
So there's 2 parts to that. Fundamentally, how people are looking at the Okay. So everybody is in search of yield. They're looking to get some type of return on their money. The big piece of that is you look around the world, and the only place that yield is showing itself is in the United States. And there's 2 spaces that are on the real estate side of it that are the favored, and that's multifamily and industrial. So you go to Europe. Europe has negative interest rates, and so there's a lot of money that's moving out of Europe and other countries coming to the United States to find investment opportunities that they can get some form of return. That's the first piece. So that pushes down cap rates. It pushes up asset prices, and then when you go in just to the fundamentals of the business right now, we're at a place where we're seeing a lot of our occupancies are up, our rents are up, and they are climbing at a rate that is higher than normal. And I'm sure as we go through the conversation, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, that's exciting. I think it's also interesting, this the fact that you're seeing a global movement as far as how money is moving in and out of various countries, because I mean, at least some of the people who are going to be listening to us talk today, they're dealing with the urgent, everyday, on-property type needs. And so getting a little bit of a chance to take a step back and see all of this big picture and where this whole big ship is kind of headed, I think people are going to be excited and encouraged to kind of hear a little bit about that. So let's talk market for a little bit when we walk through this. How do you see the market working? Where do you see these present opportunities? And I know you've kind of pitched that a little bit, but kind of take us further down that path for a little bit.
Yeah, so prior to COVID, people and jobs were moving into the Sun Belt. So that's Phoenix to Denver to across to Nashville, over into the Carolinas and down into Florida, Atlanta. There have been a lot of businesses and people that are moving that way. Started pre-COVID. Okay, now COVID hits and COVID puts an acceleration onto that. Mm-hmm. And all the nuances that came with COVID, regardless of how you feel about how one state handled it or another, we now have an accelerator that is hit on jobs and people moving into the Sun Belt. And so you can look nationally and go, okay, they're saying we've got a problem with housing, and we do. And then you come into the Sun Belt, and that gets accelerated. And so there have not been a ton of press and articles on that, but they're starting to come out, which for me makes it very tough. As a person who works on the acquisition side trying to get ahead of deals, it's going to continue to get harder to do, because we're going to start getting that solid validation of things that we know and feel in the market today. Mm-hmm. We're going to start getting that in the press. And so last week there was an article that was hit the press, said that since January 1 of this year to June 23rd, 44 HQs left California and went to the Sun Belt. 21 of those landed in Dallas, Fort Worth, and or Austin.
Wow.
And so those are things that you get the big headlines on that, but then there are lots and lots of other smaller organizations that you don't get that press.
Yeah.
But being in the markets, talking to various people, you hear about this company coming from California, this one coming from New York. Company that was one's in San Francisco, one office in San Francisco, the other office is in New York City, and they're fed up with what they're having to deal with, and they are now consolidating down into Dallas. That goes on and on and on. And so that is bringing jobs and people into the Sun Belt. So good for everything that is in the Sun Belt. And so the other thing that's really that's a big part of what's happened is just construction.
Okay, so talk about that, because that's something that seems to also be in the headlines a little bit regarding like construction costs and stuff like that. What do you see in there?
You do get stories about construction and construction cost, and so everybody saw the headlines of timber and lumber, mm-hmm. and the shortage of that, and that the prices of that soaring and commodities soaring, and supply of appliances being behind because they can't get into the production line. The flows just are not working.
Yeah.
And so that has taken construction costs in certain places from 20% up to 40%.
Wow.
And that creates its own set of problems. And nobody knows, whether, the Fed says the word transitory on inflation, and they believe that once the supply chains get back in order, that some of that will come back in line.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody knows. We're on uncharted territory, but we do know for a fact that we got more people and jobs coming than what were expected, and we have construction costs that are going through the roof. And in our business, another piece of it is the cost of land. And so, you're looking at land prices that have gone up because people are looking for places either for apartments or for homes.
Yeah.
And they're gobbling up to try to catch up with the demand that's hitting us.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to think about this because I think you also look at some of the generational developments of younger generations being more at home in multifamily housing apartments and those types of opportunities than some of the previous generations, as far as like, I don't necessarily need to buy a home. I have this great opportunity, and you mix that in with the migration that you're talking about, the construction costs that you're talking about, and how I just can't imagine the ripple effect of all of these things kind of hitting all at the same time. How does that impact submarkets and all of the other types of things that are kind of underlaying this conversation?
Some things change and some things do not change. I think a lot of the suburbs conversation is probably going to be a little bit overblown. I have two children that give me a unique perspective on the situation. One of them's 25. He lives in Houston.
Okay.
And he works in the real estate business. And when he's been down there for 2 years, a graduate out of UT.
Okay.
And when he graduated, I tried to get him to live in one of our new properties out in the suburbs. And he goes, no way. I mean, that's 20 minutes from work. It's 20 minutes from being in the hub of the excitement that he's a single young man, being away from where the restaurants and the bars and all of that occur and where your friends are at.
Yeah.
And so he was not going to live out at Promenade Jersey Village out in the suburbs. Then about a year later, I have a daughter who has a somewhat, she's 2 years younger, 23, has a somewhat built-in family to start with, and they lived out in Jersey Village.
Okay.
And they recently were in an apartment and have the opportunity now and bought a house.
Okay.
And they bought a house because they got 2 kids, they got 2 dogs, and that's not conducive for living down in the urban core. And so those things have not changed.
Yeah.
If you are a family, odds are you want to live out in the suburbs. If you are single and with a variety of other characteristics, then you want to live in the urban core closer to your work. And some things you just get on the ground and you sense. And driving around Houston last week with the acquisition team, I look at the traffic, I go, we're back.
Yeah.
And we're back more than we were. I mean, it's crazy. And you get in that environment and you go, I don't want to live 30, 40 minutes from work if I don't have to. But if you have a family and you go, okay, I'm going to go live out in the suburbs and I'll commute down when I have to. And so one thing that is going to happen, it's already started, people are going back into offices, but the corporations are pretty much going to start having a mandate starting in Labor Day that your work is in the office.
Wow.
And so just take downtown Houston for an example. completely shut down. It was a ghost town for during COVID. And so that has a huge impact on the high rises that were in downtown just got decimated. But the communities that are just outside of downtown, Midtown, Montrose, River Oaks, are impacted as well. And so as Labor Day comes and corporations begin to start having workers come back into downtown, either part-time or full-time, that's going to have an impact and start to change the dynamic as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That was part one of my conversation with Charlie Young. I know his insights were educational for me, and I highly encourage you to join us for part two, which will be coming to you shortly. See you then. Thank you.